Hi, everyone. This is Dee Marley with the History Bards podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are thrilled to have Leigh Anne Edwards on the show today. And Leigh Anne has always had a vivid imagination and a love for romance, history, castles, and magic. I mean, those are the greatest combinations for a historical fantasy writer, right? So,
I,
yeah. And your bio has talked about that you have traveled extensively to the UK and to Ireland and to Massachusetts, all in conjunction with your series, right?
yes, yes.
And we're thrilled to know that you have 5 series out for readers. And that's really amazing. It shows a very prolific background for you as a writer. So we would love for you to tell our listeners a little bit more about you and your writing journey and how you got to be able to write so many books.
Okay. Well, I'm so happy to be here and to finally meet you in person,
Yes, yes.
sort of. I'm Leigh Anne Edwards, as you said. I live in Canada, Alberta, Canada. I grew up in Manitoba and moved to Alberta. I've been here half my life now, but always on the Canadian prairies. So I grew up in a very small town. In fact, when I was growing up, there might have been 50 people in
Oh,
that.
wow.
So it left a lot of time on your own to use your imagination. I read
Yeah,
a lot. I started out reading with like Anne of Green Gables. That was sort of
yes,
everyone's, especially every Canadian girl's
yes, it is.
their go-to, right? But I always liked magical stories as well. In fact, in my teenage years, I really went sort of to horror. I thought Stephen King was my, so that comes through a little bit in my writing as well, because there's lots of monstrous creatures and fantasy in my stories.
Right.
Um, I always wanted to write. Um, Out of high school, I was engaged, and so in my opinion, or in my youth, I believed that to go to school to become a writer, you had to become a journalist and you had to, go to war-torn countries. And that was not what I wanted to do.
Right.
You really didn't hear of people becoming, at least having a lucrative career as a creative writer. Not
Exactly.
so I married and had my 2 daughters, and
Mm.
a series of different jobs through the years, and some of them were really nice. I worked as a teacher assistant at a school, and I worked in a flower shop, and others not so great in a quilting factory, and those kind of things. But
Yeah.
I always in the back of my mind wanted to write, and I didn't, other than letters and things like that, which I still like to do. But finally, my daughters were, I think, 10 and 12 or something like that. And I decided I'm going to try to. I had read some beautiful novels, and then I read some that were just, I guess what we'd say, duds. And I thought, I could probably write a book that good, you know? Of course, it took a little more than that, too, but I did. That's when I started. I started writing historical, but I can never write just historical. I have to add the fantasy, the magic.
Yeah.
I've tried several times, because sometimes I think if I didn't go off in the fantasy direction, I might have more followers, because historical is huge, right?
Yes,
Um,
it is. It is.
but so I started writing. I back then it was you had to submit a manuscript, and it's totally different than now, right? And so I submitted to 8 different publishers in the U.S., because Canada doesn't have a lot of publisher, at least they
Right.
didn't back then. And 6 of them said they didn't take new authors, and 2 of them said they didn't. No, actually, I'll back up. 4 of them said they didn't take new authors. 2 said they didn't take authors without agents, and 2 said it was interesting, but just not for them right now.
Yeah.
So it was just pushed to the back burner again. My children were still teenagers, and you know how busy teenagers are. You need
Yeah.
to bring them everywhere. And so it was back in 2008. I went to Ireland for the first time, and just seeing those castles
Oh,
and
yes.
gardens and magic, it just, I mean, I've never really believed in fairies or those kind of things, but I wouldn't have been at all surprised to have a fairy, or a leprechaun or whatever. And so I came back and I wrote The Farrier's Daughter, which is the first book that I ever had published.
Right.
I had ideas for a very long series, and so my husband, I'm divorced and remarried. My husband and I decided we would, because again, it is still difficult to break into the industry.
Yes.
How many, no matter how many advancements this industry has made, it's still difficult.
It's still difficult, yeah.
It is. So I self-published the first 2 books in the series with a Canadian publisher, Friesen Press, and they were great, very helpful, but very expensive. And that's just, and I didn't know anyone then, didn't have the contacts that I do now.
Right.
But so I published the first 2, and they were doing fairly well. And we had decided we'd go ahead with a third one because I had 3 initially. And but it was expensive, and you relied on them for everything because I didn't know. Anyway, 2015 I went to so that was in 2014 that I published the first 2. 2015 I went to a writers conference in Calgary, and the main reason I went was because Diana Gabaldon was
nice.
And so, but I'm sort of an introvert, and as the time was coming closer, my husband basically had to talk me into going.
Oh,
I think I'll just, it was very hot, and I don't do well in the heat, and most people don't know that Canada gets hot. We're going for our cold, right?
It does.
Well, I mean, I guess it's all relative. But it does get to, I'll try and it gets to 100, and it gets quite humid.
Wow.
And it was like that. And I thought, I don't want to be in a room with a lot of people, probably too warm. And I also have a sun intolerance. So driving the 3.5 hours to Calgary from Edmonton was, a bit of a challenger, I thought so, but my husband talked me into it.
Well, good.
Yes. And I went to a couple of sessions where you could pitch your, and the first one was more horror. It was a Canadian publisher, and I knew that pitch session didn't go well. And then one, I had signed up. Actually, I didn't really sign up for 2. I only signed up for the 1, but I was coming out, and this lady must have seen my look on my face or whatever. And she said, there's an opening for one tomorrow that just opened up. It's a romance. And I said, well, mine is, it is deep down, it is romance. So it was sort of a fluke. And I went to, it was Thule Publishing, who is my publisher. They're from San Clemente, California. And it was a very lovely young woman who, it was one of her first, I think one of her first meetings too for pitches. So we were both a little nervous, but she was so sweet. And about 2 weeks, she was interested. And I said, but I didn't know anything about Thule, and I'd researched them, and they were mostly contemporary romance. And I said, I don't know that I'm going to be a good fit. And she said, well, we're just branching into history, historical.
Wow.
And so it was just the right place at the right time. And about 2 weeks later, she messaged me wanting the first book, the manuscript, to read it over. I sent 2 because the end of the first one is a bit of a cliffhanger, and hear from them for about 2 months. And I thought, well, that was exciting, and that's that. And then, then I heard back from them around Christmas time, and they wanted to wanted to republish the first 2 books and publish the third. So I signed on to that, and they liked them. They were doing well, so they signed on for the next 4 in that series. And then now 3 more series, and actually I've signed a contract for a 6th series. So
well, congratulations on that, because like you said, that was such a fluke that happened.
It was almost like it was meant to be,
Yeah, it kind of shows you how that for authors that sometimes get discouraged going to those conferences and signing up for a pitch, that it can be really discouraging, but to not give up. And
that's right.
You never know when it is just going to be the right fit. And it does have to be that. It has to be the right fit. for the publisher and for an agent, or if you're pitching for an agent, all of those factors have to kind of, you know,
Just
collect.
gel.
Yeah,
Yes.
they have to gel. They really do. Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you
So
so
can you,
much. I was so excited,
I
because
know you were.
everyone, almost all authors dream to become published and to sign with the publisher, right? Because
Right.
they have the know-how all and the experience that
Yes.
and now I still have never self-published because I'm quite happy in my little niche with
Yeah.
Thule. But I think if I was to self-publish now, at least I have the contacts with the cover designers and the
Yes.
editors, but I'm quite happy the way it is now.
I'm sure you are. I'm sure you are. So, in all, just so that our listeners can kind of know, in all, how many books do you have at the present?
I have 22 published. One more is coming out next week. I just sent in my 24th to my developmental editor, and so I'm waiting to hear back from her, and I'm ready to start 25 because that's the end of this series, and then I've signed for another 5-book series. So that will be
That's
30.
amazing. That's amazing because, it's kind of like readers really like to know that because, if they get invested into an author and they really like the writing, it's kind of like with Diana Gabaldon, that you were saying, people are anxiously awaiting what's going to be next.
Mhm.
I know a lot of us, like starting out younger, I was a huge Victoria Holt fan.
Oh
And
yeah,
so that, and then whenever, she was no longer around, it was so, because you get so invested
yes.
into an author. And so to know that you have that many books is really good for a reader who gets invested in your books to know that they're going to be continuous and that they have something to look forward to. That's great. So fans out there of historical fantasy books, particularly, please go out and get Leigh Anne's books and check them out. So that brings us to, can you tell us a little bit more about maybe not maybe as the different series as a whole, but also maybe as briefly about each series?
Right. Okay. Well, the first one, the Irish Witch series, it takes place in Ireland. It takes place in the 1500s. It's mostly around one couple. Um, Olin is a healer to Clan O'Brien, and Killian, the love of her life, is the chieftain's nephew. So of course there's the whole. Um, they're not supposed to even really have anything to do with each other. But she healed him because she's a magical healer as well. That's kept hidden. But when he was 12, he was hurt quite badly, and she was 7, and she healed him, which sort of forged their friendship.
Yeah.
But then it skips ahead 10 years. She's 17, he's 22, and they are falling in love, but basically aren't supposed to be because of the class system. They're not even supposed to
Right.
be together. But so the 7 books follows how their relationship develops, and it is a love story, but there are lots of different magical creatures and mythical. The Celtic gods come into it.
Okay. Okay.
Mythology. And so that's 7 books, and I wanted that to be longer because after the 7th book, it is not finished. But
Oh.
at that point, Thule had said, "Well, readers aren't going for long series anymore,"
Hmm.
and I believe in some ways that is true. I've been to some fairs and some where people will say, "Oh, 7 books." No, I don't want to get into something that long. Yet there's other people who say, "Oh, I'm reading book 25," and
I
it's like,
know, I know. That's interesting that they said that because,
and I
you
think
know,
they've kind of come around a little bit now because there are more. But anyway, so they said, "We want you to write another series, not anything to do with this one. We'll see." And so I wrote a Norse series. It's also fantasy because the 4 main, the 3 sisters and their mother are from a different world, and
mhm,
they come to Earth during the time of the Vikings. And so it is also fantasy magic.
right.
So those are 4 books, 4 very long books. That's those are the series I've ever, I mean, the longest, the most pages
The
per
most
book.
pages, yeah.
Right. And then I went back to Thule because readers were still saying, we haven't found out what's happening with Ellen and Killian, like what's happening at the end. So finally, I talked to Thule, we had a few meetings, and some of the readers contacted Thule and they wanted more. So they said, well, we don't want to go for another with just Ellen and Killian. Thule really likes to have, a series where there might be 4 sisters or 4 brothers or whatever, where each couple has a story. So I then went on for a spin-off of The Irish Witch. It's called The Witches of Time. There's a lot of time travel involved in that.
Okay.
And 3 of Ellen's descendants are involved too. They each have a story. And then in the 4th book, they all come together, and the 4 women and their guardian husbands. And at the end of the 4th book, The Irish Witch and The Witches of Time are completed. The readers get to know the rest of the story.
Oh, that's good. That's great.
And then I wrote a completely different series. It takes place during medieval times in England, and it's called The Maidens of the Mystical Stones. It takes place in a little village around Stonehenge. And I did my research, my genealogy, and the Edwards family came from a little village 8 miles from Stonehenge.
Oh,
so
nice.
that is how that came about. And so this series, it's very different. There is magic involved, but when you meet the characters, they don't have magical abilities, at least in the beginning. So, but the premise of that series, there's 4 very different women from 4 different walks of life. There's a healer. I almost always have a healer in my stories. So there's a healer, and she's the main character. But she has a friend whose mother is a harlot, and so she will be expected to become a harlot. Then there's a princess and a castle servant. And so they're very, very different, and they become friends, like very unexpectedly, but they become friends because and I'm not giving too much away because it happens in the first chapter. They lose their mothers all at the same time, and in fact, their funerals, their burials are the same day. So that's what, connects these 4 women. Right. 4 girls, they're 12, 13, 14. So then we jump ahead 5 years, and they're all expected to do something they don't want to do. Selena is going to have to become a harlot, and Elspeth has to follow and be a castle servant. She has been already, and she has to marry someone that is horrible, abusive. And Liliana, the princess, has to move to Wales and marry a Welsh prince, and she doesn't speak the language and doesn't want to go. And then Rhiannon, the main character, the healer, has to marry as well, because women are expected to marry. Right. She can't continue to be a healer. She, that's what her aspirations are. So they're meeting the last night before they have to be married, or one has to leave and one has to start the life as a harlot. And they've been drinking in these magical stones in Stonehenge. And they say, well, I would trade you, and I would trade. And this is the, and this magical old woman appears and said, but would you, if you had the opportunity, would you trade places? And so that's, the 3 of them want to, Rhiannon doesn't, but she eventually agrees. And so for each book, then in the series, she has to live the life of, they trade bodies, and it's like Freaky Friday, but with
Freaky Friday.
And then we needed a 5th book. My editor and I agreed we needed a 5th book to tie it all up. So that's The Maidens of the Mystical Stones. And now I'm writing a series that is also a spin-off of The Irish Witch and the Witches of Time. There were 2 characters who I really liked, and they didn't have a lot of exposure in the stories, but they were really intriguing and very different, and their storylines are kind of connected. So that's what I'm writing now. It's called Witch and Demon Hunter. Fiona is a witch. She's early 50s. Larkin's mid 30s. He's half demon, half human, half demon. And his father did some terrible things in Fiona's life that I won't tell because it's quite a giveaway. But they don't like each other. But they work for this agency called LAM, which is Locating and Assessing Magical Beings. And they are forced to become partners. And they do not want to even be together, much less partners. But it's been very interesting. I like the characters. I like writing them. It's, the banter between them, and it has really shocked me because there is such an attraction, and readers, I thought, there's 19 years difference between she's 53, he's 34 when it begins. There's an attraction, but they don't like each other. And readers from the beginning have been just, oh, they have to get together. And my editor in the beginning said, no, I don't think readers would like that. There's too, that's a generation difference, and they have all this history and all this negative. But it's been interesting. And this series, I think, is the one where I would have to say is most like the characters are just, I'm just along for the ride. The characters they've taken over them.
And that happens a lot from whether it's historical fantasy or historical fiction in general. It definitely does happen a lot. I've heard that from a lot of authors.
So I'm writing. I just finished book 4. I have one more to write, and I actually would carry on further with this series if Thule agrees. But I also have another series to write. It's a sequel to the Maiden series I was telling you about. This one will take place in Wales. There's 5 brothers, and they have a dragon curse. They're dragon shifters. So
wow. So yeah, and I love stories about whales. That was my last book, Kingfisher, and I'm working on the sequel to that one as well. Who knows when that will be done? But mine had 5 sisters in Wales, and it's a time travel. So I love those kind of time travel, especially in Wales, because there's so much history there. There's so much connection to King Arthur and all of those legends and everything. So it's a lot of fun to write about.
Yes. I that's why I wanted to pursue that a little bit more, because there was just one book that took place, part of a book that took place in Wales, and I was just very intrigued. And I have a Welsh connection too, like long ago. And in fact, that was where I could go back the farthest with my genealogy was
nice.
Wales in the year 900.
Oh, wow. That's amazing that you were able to get back that far.
And it was because of my grandmother's middle name. They gave her a surname. All the women were given a surname of Blaney and Caldwell. And that's how this Caldwalder Blaney or whatever came up, and it went way back, and we were Welsh royalty.
Oh, that's amazing.
And then they moved to Ireland. And my husband, who is from England originally, says, I wonder what happened that they lost. I said, your ancestors probably invaded. And
probably so. There's a story there. There's another story, another book.
Although, like I say, the Edwardses were English too, so it could have been another one of my relatives.
Yes, that's right. It could have. Well, we really do appreciate you being on the show today. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about your website, or if you have a website that they can go to learn more about you and your books?
I do, yes, I will. It's leighanneedwards.com, very simple. And yes, all my books are there, and they're all on Amazon, all the online bookstores, and they're all available in print so far as well. Some people prefer print, and others think it takes up too much space, basically, is what a lot of people
but I'm seeing a trend. There seems to be a trend towards going back to print instead. I think during COVID, because we couldn't get out, there was such a huge spike in sales for ebooks. But I think now it's slowly, gradually going back to print, because there's just nothing like having a book in your hand.
The whole experience, right? The feel and the smell. I like the smell of books.
I think, yes, we've all done that, haven't we? Stuck our nose in a book.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, literally. Well, thank you so much, Leigh Anne, for being on the show today. We will definitely post your link on the screen, and also whenever we post this, we'll put it in the description so people can go and try to and find you and find your books. And we really appreciate you being on the show today.
Oh, I so appreciate you inviting me. I was really excited.
Well, you have a great day. And to all of our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on the podcast today. And as always, this is Dee Marley at the History of Bards podcast. Keep making history and keep listening.